My name's Rachel Newton, and I'm Secretary of the Greece Solidarity Campaign. The campaign called the meeting today with Haringey Trades Council and AKEL UK, and also, as Isidore has said, we're kindly hosted here today by the Greek Cypriot community, the Greek Community Centre. We're here today to discuss the shocking situation unfolding in Greece now. I think to talk about what it means and also what we think should be done about it. We're really delighted today to have a number of speakers tonight who can talk about both the effect of the situation that it's having on the Greek people, and also to talk about the alternatives to austerity, alternatives to the policies that are being imposed on them by what is an unpopular coalition, their own unpopular coalition, who has no mandate, and also by diktat from the IMF, the EU and the World Bank. So I won't say any more and introduce our first speaker, but just to say before then, after the speakers, there'll be time for you to contribute your own thoughts and also to ask any questions that you might have. So our first speaker today, I'm absolutely delighted, is Πάμπρος Χαραλάμπους, who's the General Secretary of the UK branch of AKEL. Please put your hands together and welcome Pámbros.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends of Greece, comrades, I would like to start by thanking you all for being here tonight and for your expression of solidarity as well as for your help to the struggling Greek people. Sadly, nothing much has changed since our last gathering, and Troika continues to put Greece through the failing experience of aggressive free market capitalism. Even though they are using the state finances as a pretext, their goal is not to nurse Greek finances back to their health, but rather they are trying to reset the Greek society, economy and politics back to the time where workers were disposable resource. Their hope is that if they succeed, they would use Greece as a blueprint to implement similar policies to the rest of Europe. 3 consecutive years of economic contraction, averaging 6% per annum and 25% unemployment rate, should have been positive evidence enough that severe austerity and aggressive free market capitalism that is not just failing only the Greek people, but also Greece lenders by strangling the economy and reducing even further the ability of the state to pay off its debts. Quite the contrary, Troika is pressing the Greek government to impose even more measures taking primary aim at the minimum wage and social benefits. Is a worker making just over 500 euros a month really the structural problem of the Greek economy? If that worker can no longer afford to feed his or her family and to send his or her children to school, will the Greek economy miraculously find itself on a better footing? Of course not. And despite the rallying of free market economists around the coast, they have offered no real-world evidence that this is the case. We agree that both the Greek economy and the state's finances need to go to a sustainable footing, but we categorically disagree with Troika's measures because we believe that they are failing the Greek people. We support measures that will promote growth, and we vote to protect the society's most vulnerable. We defiantly disagree that the pensioners, low-paid workers, and the disabled are part of the problem, and we definitely disagree that pushing them more into poverty will solve the problem. Troika's measures target the middle and the working class, while allowing ample time for the super-rich to sift their money through Europe to avoid taxes. The argument that many make when faced with the harsh reality of Greece is, why should European taxpayers pay for Greeks' cushy lifestyle? While this argument has proven successful in providing a convenient context to help gather popular support for the measures within Europe, it is factually incorrect. As Nick Malkoutsis points out in his article, The Greek Crisis, an economic problem, not a moral contrary, only 30% of the bailout money are used to meet the operational needs of the Greek government, and that percentage is dropping fast. The remaining 70% is going towards repaying existing debts to the profit-making organizations that choose to bear the risk of lending to Greece in return for high interest rates. For example, in June 2012, German private banks held 22 billion of Greek debts. The first bailout served for Greece to pay its short-term debt obligation in full and allow those private banks to recoup their investment. It was largely an indirect bailout to private banks. The bill of this bailout was footed by the European taxpayers, and the consequences are borne by the Greek public. By now, the majority of the Greek debts is held by the supranational lenders, namely the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, who, in their turn, have bought the bonds as a deep discount and are themselves turning a profit. It is ironic at best and immoral at worst for those organizations to argue for further pain for the Greek people when they are profiting from the current state of affairs. That profit should have been used to put in place growth generating measures that will give some breathing space to the Greek economy. That's better serving both the Greek people and the mandate of those international lenders. So if the measures are clearly failing, why does the Troika and the proxies in Greece continue to push for them? As mentioned earlier, their goal is not to bring the Greek economy to a sustainable footing, but to convert it to an aggressive free market economy and subsequently to be used as a blueprint for the rest of Europe. This is also the reason behind their apparent aversion to democracy. We saw earlier evidence of Troika's stance towards democracy in their very positive reaction to the appointment of prime ministers in Greece and Italy in 2011. It became clear during the recent Greek parliamentary election as they and the other like-minded politicians threatened the Greek electorate with ejection from the common currency. It was a shameless and unacceptable interference in Greek international politics, which unfortunately proved effective. In reality, ejecting Greece from the Eurozone was always an empty threat. There is no legal basis for ejecting a country based on its finances. No European country can be ejected from the Eurozone against its will. Furthermore, such an action will show the bonds between member states to be weak and reversible. The Union would lose economic and political credibility, and it will likely lead to disorderly disintegration of the euro. What would the consequences be? We have a similar historical precedence in the disintegration of the USSR, which followed by the lengthy period of instability, the tearing of the social fabric, and eventual financial ruin for the countries involved. In that case, like the case of Greece, international lenders used the opportunity to impose free market capitalism to the Eastern Bloc countries, which intensified the consequences of the crisis and eventually led to Russia declaring default on its debts in 1998, plunging the world into financial crisis. The financial problems of the Greek government are rooted in the political problems that they have weighing Greece down for decades. The two parties that alternate power indulge in nepotism and fraud against the Greek people. To maintain their hold on power, they gave government jobs in return for votes, plotting the government wage bill with people whose sole qualification was political patronage. At the same time, they embarked on expensive and unnecessary projects to provide opportunities for enriching themselves through kickbacks and fraud. The scandal with the purchase of the submarines is only the tip of the iceberg. The Siemens scandal alone is estimated to have cost the Greek government €2 billion. Yet Siemens were able to settle the case for a mere €170 million in direct fines, and is still allowed to bid for Greek government contracts. Why is not Troika furious about this injustice? Why is Berlin not demanding that the Greeks recoup the full €2 million from Siemens rather than attack pensions and the minimum wage? Exposing past scandals and putting mechanisms in place to prevent this kind of fraud in future is the first step in putting the Greek economy and the Greek political life in a sustainable footing. Recouping the cost of the past scandals from corporations who have participated in defrauding the Greek public would provide much-needed short-term funding for programs and promote growth. Closing, I would like to stress once more that the memorandum that escort the bailout do not contain measures to promote a healthy economy. Troika and eager Greek administration are using the crisis as a pretext to impose an aggressive form of free market capitalism on the Greek people and then use it as a blueprint for the rest of Europe. We support measures that promote growth and development, and we vote to protect the vulnerable because we believe that those measures are ethical, effective, and sustainable. We particularly criticize the foreign interference in recent Greek elections through fear-mongering and threats of injection from the Eurozone. Finally, despite our disappointment at the fact that the neoliberal parties marginally managed to hold on the power in recent elections in Greece, we note the strong progress of the left that signals a change in tide, and we are very hopeful that the left parties will soon be able to reverse the fortunes of the country. Thank you very much.
The next speaker that I'm delighted to introduce is Mαρίνα Πρεντούλη, who's an academic, but she's here today representing Syriza, the largest party currently opposing austerity in Greece. So please put your hands together for Mαρίνα.
Hi. Well, I hope this is working. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk a little bit about three different things, and I'm going to focus on what is changing these days. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the economic trends that we see in the media these days. Then I want to talk about the series of proposals in relation to how we can reorganize the economy. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how Syriza itself is changing as a leftist organization. So it's the latest things that they are happening. So I was in a discussion a few days ago with economists, and they were saying that probably IMF role is changing a little bit from what they follow in the media, I mean. And what they meant by that is that, in a way, IMF is seen to be distancing occasionally itself from what is happening with the European Central Bank and so on. So why they were discussing that and what was happening with this? This had to do with the decision of the European Central Bank. The decision of the European Central Bank was to buy bonds of the member states, so the interest rates regarding the lending agreements will remain within logical levels, let's say. So European Bank is making this move, is buying the bonds of the member states, but the idea is that in exchange, these member states have to agree to all the memorandums. So the idea is that European Central Bank is looking as if it is supporting the member states, but there is an exchange for that. They will have to follow all the memorandum agreements. So it is, in this way, it is as if it's saying to the governments, move on with the agreements, make all these changes that Babos was talking about, destroy labor, destroy any employment agreements, any rights that we have so far. Do that fast. Don't worry, we are behind you. And if you have to worry about something, is the political danger. Now, within this process, the IMF looks as if it's changing as well. So instead of being directly connected with giving money to member states, it is taking a supervising role, a macroeconomic supervising role of the programs of all these member states. Still, what is at the bottom of all that is one thing, the destruction of the European social welfare model that we have and the destruction of labour across Europe. It's just that I wanted to give you an idea of different debates and how occasionally in the media the role of the IMF and the European Central Bank, it looks as if it's changing, but of course we will have to pay for that. Yeah. Now, what are the Syriza proposals? Syriza has very specific proposals in terms of how we are going to exit this crisis, and it has proposals that are based on a just alternative economic system, that it will help us reorganize the society, which is collapsing in a certain way, production, and of course take care of the environment and environmental issues in Greece as well. Now, as you may know, the first step for Syriza is that we have to get rid of the memorandum, to nullify the memorandum, and renegotiate the lending agreements. This should be our starting point. And from there on, Syriza has certain aims. First of all, is to create a shield where it will offer some social protection in order to avoid the humanitarian crisis that we have these days in Greece. The second aim is the reduction of unemployment. As you know, unemployment is very high in Greece. We are talking about a couple of million people. Third, safeguarding all social services, welfare state, especially health, education, which of course these days they are in a very bad shape in Greece. Another aim of Syriza is to make Greece sufficient in terms of food, in terms of medicine, in terms of oil. Another aim is the reduction of the deficit. And finally, we have to, the final aim is to protect the national resources and the environment in Greece. In order to achieve all these aims, we are talking about encouraging a different type of production, a production which is based on cooperation, self-management, and solidarity. So we will have, if we want to avoid, to get out of this crisis, to reorganize production on different bases which are very different of the neoliberal policies that they are selling us now. Also, Syriza is focusing on some very specific production clusters, the areas where we have to focus and work on. The first one is the agriculture. We have to become self-sufficient. We have to get rid of middlemen and profiteering. The second one is the tourism cluster. And there we will need to create a different type of approach, a holistic approach, where it will connect tourism back to the social and economic life of Greece. So you know all these ideas about these big resorts where British people usually go and you can eat and drink and stay there and see nothing of Greece. They are out, I'm afraid. I don't know if it matters that much. Energy cluster, finally. And this has to do with all this process of privatizations that we see in Greece. So Syriza has this program of how we are going to exit the crisis, how we have to reorganize production, and of course the first step is to nullify, to get rid of the memorandum. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about what is happening with Syriza today. There's a lot of internal changes with Syriza as well. Now, on the 14th of May, before the election in Greece, Alexis Tsipras, the leader of Syriza, announced that Syriza itself is transforming into a broad democratic left, a broad political coalition, if you want. So the idea there is that if we want to have in Greece a leftist government, that presupposes changes within the left as well. So in the elections that happened on the 17th of June, Syriza was presented as a unified party. Instead, as you know, Syriza has 12 different organizations that they were coming together in a coalition, but from that moment onwards, we are talking about Syriza as a party. Now, the first reason for that at that stage was technical, legal, if you want. The idea was that in the Greek election, the party who wins the election takes 50 extra seats, which gives it a great majority within parliament. So they had to become legally a party in order, in case they were winning, they will get these 50 extra seats. But the unification of Syriza into a political actor, it has a much broader scope. We have to remember that Syriza moved from a coalition that it was getting the 4% of the vote to something which is now it was in the election 28%. So we need to create this unified political frontier, if you want, which on the one hand it will be against the lending agreements, the memorandums, and on the other it will argue for a leftist government. I mean, as you may know, Golden Dawn is also against the memorandum agreements, but we are talking about those that are against the memorandum agreement, the lending agreements, but they are looking for a leftist government. So what is happening now with Syriza is that we are moving in November to have our national conference, πανελλαδική συνδιάσκεψη. And at this moment, there are a lot of open meetings organized by Syriza through public calls. There are members and non-member meetings, and they are organized according to the geographical area, according to different workplaces or educational institutions. So this is the process that we are in now before the national conference, which I think it will be the first 2 weeks of November. So I think I talked for a long time, maybe. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, I'm very pleased to say, is Paul Mackney, who's the chair of the Greece Solidarity Campaign and also the former General Secretary of the Teachers' Union, NATFI. So please welcome Paul.
If that's not working, I think I'll go from here. Years ago, I was told a Cypriot proverb. Actually, I've never met a Cypriot who knows the proverb, but I'll tell you anyway, because it describes the situation Greece is in. For the benefit of the TV, this is a Cypriot proverb, I was told. It's called a stone and egg situation, and someone can tell me, please, if it is a Cypriot proverb. Lawrence Durrell says it is. Anyway, in short, it goes, egg falls on stone, alas for egg. Stone falls on egg, alas for egg. And that's more or less the situation Greece is in at present. Whatever it tries to do, it seems to be punished. If it didn't fulfill the memorandum, then it gets attacked by the banks and the other countries. If it does, then it's destroying its own people. The Solidarity Campaign, the Greece Solidarity Campaign, some of you will have picked this up, was founded after we had a letter from Manolis Glezos, who will appear here. That's not him, by the way. That's a caption competition. And Manolis Glezos and Mikis Theodorakis. Most people know Mikis Theodorakis, the composer of Zorba the Greek, and many other wonderful pieces of music. Manolis was the man who effectively started the resistance in Europe when he and another man climbed up the Acropolis 2 weeks after the Nazis had moved into Athens and pulled down the enormous swastika which had been put there, which turned out then to be a symbol for resistance in Europe. And not many people in Britain remember it, but actually at that time, against Hitler's Germany, there were two countries. There was Greece and there was Britain. And the fact that they started that resistance was significant. You then got the resistance beginning in France and so on and so forth. And we thought, or I think, and many others think, that we have a kind of duty to that spirit of comradeship and working together, and what we were hoping would come out of the war, which did come out of the war for people in Britain, albeit with lots of faults, a welfare state of sort, but which didn't emerge in Greece until about the late 70s, 1980s, for reasons we don't have time to go into here. Now, it's worth remembering here that we've only seen 20% of the cuts which the man who was kissing Angela Merkel just now, Cameron, has planned for us. If we want to see what the end result of the austerity process is, we need to look to what's going on in Greece, because as Paμπρος said, it's being used as a guinea pig, a test bed for a shock doctrine where ordinary people lose most of the gains that they've had since the Second World War. We went to Greece at the invitation of Glazos and Theodorakis after Tony Benn, who many of you may know as a former Labour minister and I suppose you could say national treasure, certainly on the left, issued an appeal for people who wanted to build a solidarity movement. We were both shocked and found it harrowing, but we were also inspired by the fact that there was resistance on a scale which would be unusual in this country, but which I think we can learn from. On the delegation, we learnt, and I'll give the up-to-date figures, that 23% of the population, then I think it was 20, are unemployed. That figure rises to 53% for youth. For young women, it's 60%, a whole generation being wasted. Greece basically being bled dry, the social fabric being pulled apart, large numbers of people beginning to leave, so many that our arrogant, Hellenophobic Prime Minister suggested he was going to break all the rules of the European Union and stop Greeks coming in to Britain, if you missed that in the summer. I'm pleased to say, though I'm not very fond of the current government in Greece, as you can guess, I'm pleased to say that when we were there in August, they had summoned the ambassador, the British ambassador, to explain Cameron's behaviour. I could go through all the other things. I'll just give a few points. Wages slashed often by up to a third, now moving towards a half. Some cases, the wages were cut retrospectively. The employers were saying, well, we should have cut your wages 2 months ago, so we're going to take it out over the next few months in addition to the other cuts we're doing. Any idea of overtime is more or less out the window. Large numbers of people owed back pay. Collective bargaining, which had been the basis of the regeneration of Greece post the kernels, and those agreements being abolished. The minimum wage reduced by 22%, and for youth by 33%. The health service being smashed, with people with chronic illnesses not able to get drugs. Pharmacies stopped giving prescriptions on credit because the state would no longer pay them for it. 60,000 small businesses, and Greece is a country of many small businesses, as I'm sure you know, going bust. Schools lacking chairs and books, and wherever you look, the railway service being taken apart, having bought, as I think Paμπρος alluded to, stock from Germany which didn't work. We're seeing in Greece something which was almost unheard of, a high level of suicides, including one person, Dimitris Christoulos, a 77-year-old pharmacist who shot himself in front of the parliament and left a note saying that he hoped young people would hang the government traitors just as the Italians had hanged Mussolini in 1945. Now, how is this being justified to us here? Because it's being done in our name by the European Union and the European Central Bank, if not the IMF, the so-called Troika. It's justified to us here with the suggestion, and you can see that these accusations can spill over to Greek Cypriots, not just Greeks, Italians, Portuguese, Spanish. There's a suggestion that somehow the Mediterranean lifestyle makes people fiscally indisciplined and financially incontinent, and that they're lazy, ouzo-swilling do-nothings and this lazy Greeks myth is very, very, very prevalent, for example, in Germany. If you looked at we went to Munich last December, I think it was, and there were some jokes along those lines. Actually, if you examine a little closer, you'll find that the Greeks work longer hours than Germans. You'll find, if you're looking for unofficial absences, i.e. people taking what's sometimes called here duvet days, days off, having a rest, not going to work, that the Greeks are about the lowest in Europe for unofficial absences. It amused me slightly, given their reputation here, nothing against them, for being extremely hard workers, that the Poles were actually top in terms of taking the most duvet days. We could go down a number of other things. The so-called profligate government expenditure actually is lower than the government expenditure here. No one is saying that it can't be done better. No one is saying that the Greek clientelist, what's that word, Fakalos type system can't be improved. That's one thing. Hopefully, Syriza and the other left parties in Greece are not contaminated with, but it's very clear that the official government parties have been well contaminated with it. And then if you look at the retirement age, again, Greece is roughly the same as the rest of Europe. So one of the key things we think it's our job to do is to destroy these myths which are being put about. We've heard them before, incidentally, at least some of us who've been around long enough, and it was before my time. But in the 30s, if you think of the economy now as a European economy, for people here in the 30s, it was mostly a British economy. And in the 30s, people used to say these Geordies and these Welsh people, where there were high unemployment, they've brought it on themselves. They're lazy, they've not worked. It was the same stuff. You can look back, same argument, scapegoating, which is going on. Now, on the news, it's presented here that there's this wonderful organisation. I mean, it's almost like Father Christmas comes round, called the International Monetary Fund. First of all, they had the sensitivity when they first arrived to arrive on the 21st of April, 2010, the 21st of April being the anniversary of when the colonels made their coup in 1967. It's also the anniversary of when the Germans took over Greece in the Second World War. But forget the sensitivity in that sense. The suggestion to us is, well, there's these nice people come around. There is particularly nice now they've got rid of that lecherous man who used to harass maids in hotels, and they brought on this rather nice, well-dressed Christiane Lagarde, and she says, you know, we're sorry to see you're having a bit of difficulty. Here's a few bob to tide you over while you sort yourselves out. But that's not actually what the IMF is about. That's the way it's presented to us. What it is about is imposing on countries what I think you called neoliberal economic solutions. So you get money to assist with problems which have been caused for you by banks, basically, and by the financial system. And incidentally, any money you get, most of it goes out of the country immediately to German and French banks in terms of Greece. But in return, imposed on you are memoranda which say you have to increase the pensions, you have to do this, that, and the other, which effectively, when we say with the slogan, you know, people before banks, that, what they say is banks before people. To restore the situation in the banks, they're actually taking it out on the people who were in no way to blame. And usually it requires privatisation. We've seen the projected figure for those who like these kind of figures is for a 25% fall in gross domestic product between 2008 and 2015. That is the biggest drop in any European or advanced, so-called advanced country since the Second World War. So you probably know that apparently there's a Greek children's character called Nasruddin Hoxha, and you probably know the story I've already said about the level of unemployment, but Hoxha had a donkey, and he was concerned that actually the donkey wasn't very economically efficient and was eating rather a lot, and the price of the food had gone up. So Nasruddin decided his solution was to reduce the rations of the donkey. So the first week he reduced them by half, and the donkey seemed to be doing okay. And the next week he reduced them by half again, and the next week again, and then the next week the donkey died. And he said, well, what a shame, I just taught that donkey how to work without eating us out of house and home, and now the bloody thing's died. Well, that's what's happening in simple terms with the IMF, the European Bank and the ECB imposing these conditions on Greece. They are destroying the social fabric and economic fabric of the country. Marina has covered the elections and the fact that you had... I remember getting a text from Jeremy, who was in Greece during the second elections, where Syriza had gone over about 4 years from 4% to 27, 28%. And Jeremy texted me, he said, I'm at Keritea, was it, in North Athens. He says, and Tsipras, who's the leader of Syriza, has just announced that when he was here in 2008 or 9, anyway, there were only 17 people in the audience, and they've just stopped counting, having got to 2,000 at the election rally. That shows the wave you've had back. Yesterday you had hundreds of thousands of people on strike. The tradition of resistance in Greek is one which we can learn from here. I'm just going to close by saying that what we're asking people to do is, I suppose you can say, join the resistance, but to work with those of us who are trying to work with people in Greece. So on this leaflet here, which some of you have picked up, there are suggestions of the sorts of things that can be done to develop practical acts of solidarity. One, for example, and we've got guidelines for it, is that a school, a workplace, a community, a social club or whatever, twins with somewhere in Greece. You get kids writing to kids in Greece. You get, and this is the good side, but those of you, of course, who go to Cyprus, it won't be so appealing probably, though it does mean you don't have to go on those long visits around all the relatives. You do some what could be called solidarity tourism and take your money to Greece to assist the economy. We'll be arranging conferences, meetings, discussions, lobbies. There's to be a meeting in Parliament organised by Katie Clark MP, who, after Jeremy went to Greece, went on another fact-finding mission. In October, there is, I think there are some leaflets at the door. On the 20th of October, there's the TUC march here against austerity. It's a Saturday. when we asked the representatives of Greek working people, what should we do in solidarity, their first reply was, fight the austerity measures of your own government, because if they get away with that there, it will be easier for them to do things here. So I hope a number of people will come on that. I think there should be at least 500,000 on it. There were on a similar rally last year, but we need to make it bigger. The next day, we've got representatives from different countries coming into an international conference. In November, we're hoping to have a speaking tour with speakers from Greece over here. I need to say that the position of, and it's not always understood, the position of but it's a formal point I have to make, the position of the Greece Solidarity Campaign is that it is not a Syriza front. It's not a KKE communist front. It's not, basically we're trying to have solidarity with all those who are resisting the measures that are crippling Greece, except for Golden Dawn. And we have to say a few words about Golden Dawn. New fascist party, terrifyingly got to 7% or so. There's not really much of a fascist tradition in Greece, but there is a militarist tradition, and there is also a collaborationist tradition which they're working on. They're presenting themselves as terribly reasonable people. There's these poor pensioners who are frightened to go to the shops. Golden Dawn says you can phone us up and we'll take you through these dreadful illegal immigrants to get you to the shops. The other week there were church bazaars outside, stalls outside a church. I've forgotten exactly where it was.
Erafina. It's outside Athens.
Okay. And Golden Dawn went through smashing all the stalls which had people on them who weren't ethnic Greeks. It's a kind of internalizing the stereotyping and the scapegoating onto the population of people coming into Greece. There is a problem for Greece dealing with the number of people coming in, but the solution, for God's sake, is not to have a fascist state, which is what they want. But with 23% unemployment, 55% youth unemployment, as they say, unemployment is the swamp within which the mosquitoes of racism breed. And that's another thing we have to be fighting against here and there. So I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit too long. I would hope we do issue on a regular basis something called Greece Solidarity Campaign updates, which for some are far too detailed, for others they're not academic enough. Vangelis, where's Vangelis gone? Vangelis over there keeps us in touch by monitoring the Greek press, and he tweets us about 6 times a day with whatever's going on. If someone's sworn at a minister or vice versa, we know within about half an hour, courtesy of Vangelis. We have support from Nancy, Eleni, and a number of the younger Greek, I call them Greek exiles, but maybe they want to be here, Greeks living in London and trying to get jobs here or working here. And I'm really pleased that there's so many representatives here of the Greek Cypriot community, and I hope we can work to do what we can for the people of Greece. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Jeremy Corbyn MP. Without further ado, I mean, just to say, we had a very successful delegation that Paul talked about that Jeremy was hoping to come on, and he wasn't able to because he had an important vote that he needed to take in Parliament, and he then subsequently went on his own delegation to meet with the opposition in Greece, and I'm sure he's going to tell us all about that. So if you put your hands together for Jeremy.
Friends, thank you very much. The delegation I went on was my own delegation. It was led by me and secretaried by me, and the entire delegation was made up of me. So there was no arguments, there was no problems, and we knew exactly what we were doing from one moment to the next.
And the reason I wasn't able to go on the wider delegation was I had one of these awful choices to make about whether to stay here and vote in the British Parliament against some aspects of the welfare cuts or go to Greece and demonstrate against the welfare cuts. And I thought the responsible and right thing to do, since I've been elected to the British Parliament, was stay here and record my vote against the issues in the British Parliament and go on a separate occasion. And to be fair, the rest of the delegation fully understood that, and there was no problem about it whatsoever. Could I just say, by way of starting, again, thank you for inviting me. Apologies for only coming now. I had to attend the funeral of an old friend in East London this afternoon. And it's nice to be in the Haringey Cypriot Centre. There are very friendly, familiar faces in the audience that remember the campaign to get the Haringey Cypriot Centre. And it nearly wasn't to be, then it nearly was, then it nearly wasn't, then it wasn't at all, and then it was, and it's here still. So what an achievement, and it was seen as an incredibly radical move at the time by Haringey to construct or provide community centres for different communities. It was seen by some as very divisive. I was told it was akin to apartheid, and a number of other completely ludicrous views were taken. I think the whole policies on all of that period and much later about community identity as part of a wider multicultural, multilingual, multi-faith community have been proved to be right and worked. And this centre has played a magnificent role in the public life of Haringey ever since it was opened. So I thank all those that have given so much time and effort to making sure this centre is successful. Thank you very much. This is a firestorm of the sale of public assets, but it's also an experiment in how we treat this period in European history. Think back to the Maastricht Treaty. The Maastricht Treaty, which I voted against in Parliament, brought in the idea that we needed a European central bank unaccountable to any national government, independent of national government, and appointed by the bankers to be the Bank of Europe. So the European Central Bank is not a public institution. It is very much a creature of the banking classes. Secondly, its duty was to maintain price stability across Europe. It has no obligation to maintain full employment, to maintain the welfare state, to maintain an environmentally sustainable society. It has none of those obligations. Its obligations are solely about maintaining the value of the euro and maintaining price stability. Very much old-fashioned 1930s orthodox economics. And that it becomes the political lesson which is being worked out now. So when you read any part of the various memoranda that have been signed by the last two Greek governments, all of them include within it restrictions on collective bargaining, restrictions on trade union activity, restrictions on welfare state, restrictions on all the rights that were won by the people of Greece after they had so brilliantly and bravely got rid of the colonels by popular demonstrations and political action. And so all of that is now being destroyed. So just suppose in 5, maybe 10 years' time, by some miracle or other, Greece has paid off all the debts, repaid all the debts to the European Central Bank, and is now being seen as a normal member of the European Union. What kind of welfare state would there be in Greece? What kind of education system would there be? What kind of health service would there be? What kind of public assets would there be? And also, how many super rich people would there be who had done extremely well out of the recession? Because if you look at the history of the 1930s in the USA, more millionaires were made during the 1930s than there were after the war or before the war. There's money in poverty, there's money in misery, there's money also in lending money. And so, again, go back to the bailouts and the bond sales. If the Greek government has to pay 6% on bonds, or 8% on bonds, or 10% on bonds, or if it then has to pay 12% on a bond in order to pay the interest on the previous bond, if it then has to pay 15% to pay the 12%, to pay the 10%, to pay the 6%, you get the picture. Somewhere along the line, a great deal of money is being made by the poverty and misery of the Greek people. And it's not just in Greece. The same thing is happening in Spain, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, and here in Britain. Quantitative easing has been used to enable banks to make a great deal of money out of the rest of us, who are paying more in tax, getting lower wages and less public services as a result of it. So we have to have a challenge to this whole process of economic austerity that is being, at the moment, meted out on the Greek people. Now, during my visit there, I, like Paul and others, met people from trade unions, from the Parliament, from social groups and many other organisations. And it's truly frightening talking to people whose entire certainties in life are disappearing. I've grown up, my whole life, all I've known is free education, the welfare state, and the idea that there is no danger for ordinary people in this country of facing absolute destitution. That's the 1940s settlement. That's the welfare state. Big holes in the net now, and the net is getting bigger and bigger holes made into it by this government. But nevertheless, that has been the principle that's underpinned our society for the past 60 years. All those certainties are disappearing in Greece, and it's not had those certainties for so long anyway. And from that, a number of political options happen. Either you accept the medicine from the ECB, IMF, and all the advice that's given, and you somehow or other try and bear the price for it. If you politically try and bear the price for it, look what happened to PASOK. Look what happened to PSOE in Spain. Look what would happen if the Labour Party tried to do the same thing here, had we won the last general election. I say that as a Labour MP and a member of the Labour Party. Because during a time of recession, there are two ways people can go. Three ways, really. One is accept it, tolerate it, and somehow or other try and survive by family networks or whatever if you've got them. Secondly, to offer a serious alternative, which is about united action, is about challenging the philosophy about it, is about opposing the whole austerity package, and argue for a socialist society where you provide on the basis of need and rather than on the basis of greed. Or you can do what the far right are doing in Greece, in Spain, in Italy, most countries in Western Europe to greater or lesser degrees, and that is pick on an appropriate minority to blame for everything. And I saw just a whiff of the Weimar Republic in Athens when I was there in May, and that was watching the fascists arrive in one particular neighbourhood, a group of young men, black leather motorbikes, revving them up, making a lot of noise, quite late at night, then going around looking for African people, looking for Afghan people, looking for anybody that wasn't identifiably Greek European, in order to abuse them and blame them for the unemployment, blame them for the poverty, blame them for the shortages. People that migrate to different societies as economic or political refugees do so out of an act of desperation. In solidarity and humanity, you solve nothing by blaming them. You solve a lot more by acting in solidarity with the victims of our system. They did not cause the problem. The greed and the wealth caused the problem, not the poverty, not the poverty of the poor. So in our solidarity with the people of Greece, fighting as they did and lost so many in the war, in the Second World War against the fascists, fighting as they did against the colonels, developing a democracy and a welfare state, our solidarity is with those people and that tradition of Greece, which is about democracy, is about solidarity, is about unity, is about equality, is about the human spirit and the development of it. And in solidarity, we march on October the 20th against austerity here. We've only seen the start of it. We've only seen the start of it. Follow what's happening here. Anyone that works in the public sector, anyone that uses a library, uses a school, uses a hospital, goes to university, they all know what is now happening. that our public services are being damaged, our young people increasingly finding it hard to get jobs, graduates even finding it very hard to get jobs, and unemployment creeping up and hidden unemployment creeping up very much. The level in Greece, as Paul said, is 23% recorded, over 50% for young people, broadly similar figures in Spain. It's not as bad as that yet here. But if this government here is allowed to carry on with the austerity programme, taking benefits away from people with disabilities, bringing in the universal credit next year, capping housing benefit at the moment, driving private sector tenants out of their homes in my constituency and here in Haringey and many other places, then we're heading in exactly the same direction. The answer, my friends, is not to do nothing. The answer is not to lie down and accept what the European Bank says. The answer is to challenge it. Challenge it politically and challenging it by our demonstrations so we force a change in direction and a change in policy. We protect our welfare state, we protect our hospitals, we protect our schools, we protect our young people from the ravages of a free marketplace at the end of it, because I see a lot of people making themselves very rich during this crisis at the expense of the millions across Europe who are being impoverished by it. Solidarity with the people of Greece. Stand together, that's the way to win. Thank you.